Welcome back to Environmental Economics. We spent the last video lecture exploring the concepts behind some of the pollution abatement policies that we discuss in this class and in civic discourse overall. Today, we're going to explore the math behind those three market-based approaches we talked about, being taxes, subsidies, and cap and trade or permitting. So let's explore our incentive-based regulation by first setting up a problem. Suppose we have two firms. We'll call one firm the green firm. It doesn't emit that much pollution, 25 tons. And we'll call one firm the brown firm. It emits a great deal of pollution, 150 tons. And as a social planner, and as a benevolent social planner, let's say, we have a goal of reducing that sum total of emissions from 175 tons overall to 100 tons. So what we're going to do now is explore two alternative policies and how they impact both the green firm and the brown firm. So one is taxing, and that'll be a per unit tax on pollution, so $60 per ton. And one is permitting, so where we give 50-ton based permits to each firm. 50 permits to each firm, we can have 100 tons total reduction or abatement. So just to quickly recap, two firms, the green firm and the brown firm, with the goal of reducing emissions from 175 tons to 100 tons. So let's first explore taxing abatement for the green firm. And for this green firm, let's give them a marginal abatement cost function of 100 minus 4Q. So if they're emitting 25 units of pollution, meaning they're not abating anything, 100 minus 4 times 25, that marginal cost is 0. Should make sense. Now if they're emitting 25, they're not abating anything, though they have no marginal cost of abatement, they will end up paying taxes on what they're polluting. In that case, it would be 60 units, or $60 per unit tax times 25. That would be $1,500. So let's put that down. So without abatement, 60 times 25 equals $1,500. So they're paying a bunch and society's not really benefiting. Let's see if we can improve upon that. So if they're being taxed on their pollution, we want to pollute until the marginal abatement cost is equal to the tax. So 60 equals 100 minus 4Q. It gets us 4Q equals 40. So this firm, this green firm's, their optimal level of pollution, Q star, is 10 units of pollution. And that's what we've got down here. How much does that cost? Well, they're being taxed on the 10 units of pollution they're emitting, so $600, and they've got to abate down to that level of pollution. How do we get that? Well, we get it from the geometry of the abatement curve. So this triangle right here is what they're abating. The total abatement cost, 1/2 base times height. What's the height? It's that $60 that we set equal to from the tax. What's the base? It's the 15 units of pollution they're abating. So they're paying $600 in tax. They also have to pay this abatement cost, which is $450. In total, they're paying $1,050 under this taxation scheme, less than the $1,500 they'd be paying in absence of abatement. Plus, society is benefiting from this abatement and from the revenue it's raising. Take a minute to go over that again on your own while I delete some of these annotations and see if you're good on how we got that number. So just to refresh everyone's memory, we first set the marginal abatement function to the tax to get that optimal level, which is 10. From there, we figure out how much we're paying in taxation, 10 units of emissions times $60 per unit emitted, and we also want to know how much it cost us to abate. Putting that all together, between the abatement cost and the tax, this firm, the green firm, is paying $1,050. Similarly, we'll explore what the brown firm does. This firm is not green, so their abatement curve is going to be more expensive for them to abate. Let's say their marginal abatement cost is 150 minus Q. So again, in a taxation scheme, how do they decide how much to pollute versus how much to emit? Well, first, how much are they doing in absence of the scheme? If they're not being taxed, they abate nothing. So their marginal abatement cost should be 0, which means they're emitting 150 units of pollution. 150 minus 150 is 0. In the presence of the scheme, how do we get their abatement number or their emission number? We set that marginal abatement cost equal to the tax. So 60 equals 150 minus Q. And from there, it's straight algebra to get that Q equals 90. And in fact, I'll call it Q star. That is this firm's optimal decision in place of the tax scheme. And I'll give it a double star to be consistent with the slides. So in absence of any abatement scheme, if they were just polluting up to the 150 they were doing earlier and paying all the tax on that, 60 times 150 would cost this firm $9,000. So let's see if by abating a little bit and paying a little bit of tax, they can improve upon that. And we've already determined that their optimal emission level is 90 units of pollution. So how much tax are they paying on that? They're paying the $60 per unit tax times the amount they're emitting. So 60 times 90, that's 5,400. And the geometry behind that is just this rectangle, right? It's a per unit tax times the number of units. How much are they paying to abate down to the 90? Well, they're abating 60 units of pollution. That's 150 that they would pollute in absence of the cost, 60 units that they're abating to get them to that optimal level of 90. And again, we calculate the abatement cost, the total abatement cost, as this triangle under the marginal curve. So the formula for area of a triangle, 1/2 base times height. In this case, that height is again 60 for the per unit cost. And the base, in this case, is also 60 because that's the total amount they're abating. So 1/2 60 squared, and that's $1,800. So previously they were emitting 150 units of pollution. If they were taxed on all 150 units, it would cost this firm $9,000. Since they make an optimal decision in relation to that tax, they abate 60 units of pollution, costing them $1,800 and paying $5,400 on the remaining tax, costing this firm, the brown firm, $7,200 total. I'm going to clean up this slide, and you should take a minute to to redo those calculations on your own. All right, so now let's see what happens when instead of being taxed for polluting, the firm is given license to pollute with permits. And again, they've got that same marginal abatement cost. That's 100 minus 4Q. And this is the green firm. Well, this green firm, in absence of policy, only emits 25 units of pollution. They certainly don't need all 50 pollution permits they have. So what they're going to do is go ahead and sell some of those extra permits on the open market. And the market, based on the tax policy from the last slide, has already determined that the price of a permit, let's say, is $60. $60 for a unit of pollution. So we get that same abatement decision, we get that same optimality condition where the price of a permit is equal to the marginal abatement cost. And the firm decides to abate 10 units of pollution. We'll say Q star equals 10. So Q star equals 10. They were given the right to pollute up to 50 units of pollution. What do? They sell those extra pollution permits on the open market at $60 a piece. So this firm now is making money from permit sales. 40 permits that they're selling at $60 a permit, they're getting $2,400 additional dollars. They still have to get down from 25 units of pollution to 10 units. And that's going to be the same abatement cost we saw under taxation. And it's just this triangle right here, 1/2 base times height. Overall, this means this firm is making money off permit sales. They're making $2,400 from selling the permits. They spend some of that money abating their own pollution. This firm, rather than a cost under taxation, now has revenue. They're making $1,950. What about the brown firm? And just to remind everyone, their marginal abatement cost function was 150 minus Q. So again, this firm was allocated 50 polluting units. And the cost of a permit on the open market is $60. So they're going to abate, same optimal condition they did last time. 60 equals 150 minus Q. And apologies for my E-pen handwriting. That Q double star equals 90. They're going to abate 60 units, pollute 90 units of pollution. How much does it cost them to abate 60 units? Well, it costs them this triangle, 1/2 base times height. Abate 60 units at a price at a height of 60 is the same abatement cost they have from last time, 1,800. So they're polluting now 90. But something's different from last time, which is they've been given the right to pollute up to 50 units. And the other firm, the green firm, is selling at $60 a permit 40 more permits, 40 more pollution permits. So this firm is paying $1,800 to abate. They're also buying $2,400 worth of permits at a cost to them of $4,200. Recall last time that they were paying, between their abatement cost and their taxes, $7,200. So now, because the government has given us the right to pollute through these permits, we are abating pollution the same amount at a way that raises revenue for the green firm and at a way that is less costly to the brown firm. This raises an important question for the brown firm because they're still paying something. It's still costly to them to abate this pollution and buy these permits, or in the other scheme, pay taxes. The brown firm is now asking themselves, should we go green? Should we invest in some technology or some process that will make our marginal cost of abatement go down? What if they want to make their MAC look more like a green firm? And in this case, we're considering it under a taxation scheme, a green tax. So if they invest in this technology to become a green firm, certainly they'll be paying less in taxes. The question is, what is the difference in abatement cost? And specifically, is the new sum of smaller taxes and new abatement, and I'll draw that here in orange, if that's less than, and I'll switch pen color, if that's less than what they were paying in old abatement cost and taxes, they'll switch. So should they make this investment? If the net present value of the benefits is greater than the initial cost of making the technology adjustment. So it looks like some of these market-based systems, these incentive-based systems, are effective at reducing pollution, either by taxing firms or creating a market for permits. But that doesn't mean that these are perfect systems. So something that might be problematic within an incentive-based system, either taxes or permits, has to do with the type of pollution we're emitting. Remember, we talked about this last unit, but what if this sort of market-based system where the brown firm is still polluting more than the green firm creates a pollution hotspot, particularly with sort of a non-uniformly mixed pollutant? It also creates an additional cost for the government or the regulatory body in that we need to make sure people are abating pollution to the extent they said possible. We need monitoring of how much they're emitting, and we need firms to comply. Put differently, what would happen if you said, I'm taxing you $60 per ton of pollution, and I said, great, I didn't pollute it all this past quarter? How do you make sure that I'm telling the truth? And conditional on that, how do you make sure that I'm paying you the correct amount? That's true regardless of the market system, whether it's taxes or subsidies or permits. There are also some problems, or potential problems, we should say, unique to permitting or cap and trade type systems. One is thin markets. Meaning, what if there aren't a high number of buyers and sellers? So in that last example, we had two firms. We had a green firm and a brown firm. And that means it could have been quite difficult for the green and brown firm to find each other and negotiate over the price of a permit. Also, it made the green firm much more powerful in a market sense than the brown firm. And while we might think that's good with labels like pollution, it's not clear a priori that that's an outcome you want. Keeping in mind this concept of hotspot, what we were doing was shifting pollutants from one firm to the other, but that also could mean we were shifting pollutants from one part of the country to the other, and that might not be a good thing. And finally, like we talked about last lecture, pollution and markets and sort of everything in between is dynamic, and it's not clear that this sort of system would be long-lasting. In that same vein, what might be wrong with taxes as an incentive-based system? And this is something, a potential problem you wouldn't necessarily see in permits, but again, the need to appreciate the dynamic aspects of the economy and of pollution. Setting the tax rate at $60 per unit might work now, but it might not work a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now. And changing tax rates can be particularly difficult. The political setting around taxation is something that requires more than economists to overcome. We also need to consider the political economy there. Next, we need to take into account the uncertainty inherent in this sort of regulatory structure. So what happens if the marginal benefit of abatement is relatively steep? So that is small changes in the quantity of abatement. That's not a very good graph, but small changes in the quantity of abatement are going to have big changes in that benefit, and we'll talk about benefits in dollar value terms. When that's the case, it's really important that we get the regulation right, that we get either the tax or the permitting right, because otherwise people just won't abate at all, and we'll have drastic implications for our benefit curve. So let's explore this graphically a little bit. And in this case, rather than a steep curve, we'll show a threshold curve. And so a threshold curve is essentially the steepest curve because you'll note this verticality here at 75 emitted units. So again, uncertainty is the problem. What happens if we have a constant marginal cost of abatement, marginal cost of pollution reduction, but we don't know what that cost is? So the regulatory body, the authority, might choose a $5 tax. What happens if the marginal abatement cost is $6? If the marginal abatement cost is a constant $6, in other words, greater than the price of the tax, we're not going to see any abatement. We're going to see a completely polluted system. On the other hand, if the constant marginal abatement cost is $4, less than the tax, we'll see full abatement. We'll see no pollution. Returning to cap and trade to close out this lecture, cap and trade, pollution allowances. Those graphs that we saw earlier were pretty compelling in terms of how we can get it to work, but there's some nuances there that it's worth exploring. So we started by saying both the green firm and the brown firm get 50 pollution permits. But what does that look like? How can we distribute these pollution permits? Well, there's a couple different ways, but what we're going to see is, in expectation, they look the same way. So what we saw was just giving them away. The green firm got 50 permits, the brown firm got 50 permits. Now, sometimes we'll see grandfathering in terms of giving them away, where firms that emit more get more permits. But we don't have to see that. We can also auction them off. So rather than the green firm being the one to sell its excess permits, we can see the government selling the right to pollute, auctioning it off as a form of revenue building. So if the government is auctioning off pollution permits, it basically functions like a tax. It's revenue building. And because of that, we see the same sort of pollution reduction, because if you just give them away, the green firm will sell its permits to the brown firm. If you auction them off, the brown firm will bid more for permits. However, keeping in mind that political economy is also important here, giving them away might build goodwill with these polluters and can be used as buy-in for industry cooperation. So let's talk about the permit market, and let's talk about what it looks like. And when we talk about the permit market, we talk about markets the way we talk about any market. from the case of supply and demand. All a market is consumers and producers coming together to negotiate over the price of a good and service. In this case, the good is the right to pollute. So we plot out supply and demand with price on the vertical axis and quantity of permits on the horizontal axis. And now let's take a minute to think about what this permit market looks like. And let's start with the supply side of the market. What does supply look like in the permit market? Well, pollution permits are set by the government where they administratively cap the amount we're allowed to pollute. In other words, they set some Q star and no one is allowed to pollute beyond that. They limit the number of permits to that Q star, which means supply is perfectly inelastic. The permits are issued by, and the number that are issued is determined by the regulator. Permits are issued by the regulator, and the determination of that quantity is determined by the regulator. What about demand? What's demand look like? Demand to the land is the marginal abatement cost. Why is that? Because the value of a permit to me, and remember all demand is your marginal willingness to pay, the value of a permit to me is the price that it lets me avoid in terms of abatement. Put differently, the government, the regulator, is not setting the price of a permit. It's being determined by the buyers and the sellers. But this price, in expectation, in a well-functioning, perfect market, which again we know doesn't necessarily exist, is the same as the emitting tax we're seeing earlier. Now, in order for us to talk about that perfect market, we need a well-functioning permit market where we don't have a lot of people gathering market power, where we have low transaction costs. We don't want people hogging permits to drive up the price. If not, we might still get the desired amount of pollution, the right number of emissions, but it might not be cost effective. So that raises our question of why is cap and trade cost effective? So take a minute to think about it on your own, and then we'll close out this lecture with the answer. And cap and trade is cost effective because it functions as a tax. We saw this a few slides ago, but what firms do is they make their optimality decision by comparing marginal abatement cost to the price of a permit in equilibrium, and they decide whether they want to pollute and buy a permit to pollute or abate. So that price of a permit, that optimal price, that equilibrium price, acts like a tax. But it's important to note that the regulator, the government, the EPA is not setting this price. The EPA is setting the amount of permits available, and the market then determines the price. So with that, we're going to wrap it up for this video lecture, and in class we'll talk about the costs and benefits and the pros and cons of these different regulatory schemes that we explored this week. Have a great week, everyone.